Welcome to Dream Stories by Dasha, your space for sleep, calm, and gentle night stories. Here you will find everything for your best sleep. If you enjoy this channel, don't forget to subscribe and like this video so you don't lose this place of peace. Now, close your eyes and slowly let go. Every December, when the first heavy snow began covering the city's streets, Evelyn packed the same old leather suitcase and quietly disappeared for 1 week. Nobody in her apartment building ever asked where she went anymore. At first, years ago, the neighbors used to smile politely and ask if she was visiting family for the holidays. Evelyn would always answer with the same small smiles, just getting away for a few days. But eventually people stopped asking. After enough winters, routines become invisible, especially lonely ones. The train ride north took almost 6 hours. Evelyn always chose the same seat beside the window, and every year, somewhere after midnight, as the train moved farther away from the crowded city lights, she felt the same strange feeling settle quietly inside her chest. Not happiness, not sadness, something in between. Something colder. Outside, snow covered the empty fields in soft silver layers beneath the moonlight. Small towns passed silently in the darkness. Occasionally, she saw warm yellow lights glowing through distant house windows and wondered briefly about the lives inside them. Families, conversations, people waiting for each other. Then the train continued forward, carrying her farther north toward the sea, toward the same hotel she had returned to every winter for the last 20 years. The hotel stood alone near the shoreline at the edge of a quiet seaside town. Old, elegant, slightly forgotten by time. During summer, tourists filled its halls and restaurants, but in winter it became almost empty, which was exactly why Evelyn loved it. The elderly receptionist looked up from the front desk the moment she entered. And I'm immediately smiled. "Room 204? He asked gently. Evelyn nodded, as always. The man handed her the brass key with familiar warmth. "Good to see you again, Miss Carter." She thanked him softly and walked upstairs. The hotel hallway smelled faintly of old wood, tea, and fireplace smoke. Nothing there ever seemed to change, and perhaps that was the reason she kept coming back. Room 204 overlooked the ocean. The same ocean she had stared at for countless nights over the years. After placing her suitcase beside the bed, Evelyn slowly walked toward the window. Outside, gray winter waves rolled endlessly beneath the dark evening sky. The shoreline was almost completely empty, only snow, wind, and the distant sound of the sea. Evelyn rested her hand lightly against the cold glass. For a long moment, she simply stood there in silence, then quietly whispered the same words she whispered every year after arriving. "I'm here again." As though someone might still be listening. Later that evening, she sat alone beside the fireplace in the hotel restaurant, a cup of tea warming her hands while soft piano music played somewhere in the background. A storm was expected overnight. The wind outside had already begun rattling the windows gently. Most guests had gone upstairs early. Only a few people remained scattered quietly through the restaurant. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the fire and, for the first time since arriving, she noticed something different. At the front desk near the lobby stood a man checking into the hotel. Tall, dark coat dusted with snow, calm voice, and somehow, even from a distance, something about him felt painfully familiar. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly around the teacup. The man slowly turned toward the lobby light, and the moment she saw his face, the breath caught in her throat, because after 20 years, Daniel was standing only a few feet away from her again. For several long seconds, Evelyn could not move. The fire crackled softly beside her, warm light flickering across the restaurant walls, but suddenly all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. Daniel signed something at the front desk while snow melted slowly from the shoulders of his dark coat. Older. Of course he was older. 20 years had passed. His hair carried traces of gray now, and there were tired lines around his eyes she did not remember before. But it was still him, still the same quiet way of standing, the same calm movements, the same voice she once knew better than her own thoughts. Evelyn quickly lowered her gaze before he could notice her staring. Her hand suddenly felt cold, despite the heat from the fireplace. This cannot be happening, she thought. Not here. Not after all these years. She had imagined seeing Daniel again hundreds of times over the years, in grocery stores, on crowded streets, at airports, sometimes in dreams, but never here. Never in the one place she had spent 20 years trying to preserve, untouched by the rest of her life. The receptionist handed Daniel a room key and said something that made him smile faintly. That small, familiar smile hurt more than Evelyn expected, because for one dangerous second, it felt as though no time had passed at all. Then Daniel turned slightly toward the restaurant and saw her. Everything in his expression changed immediately. The calm disappeared first, then the color from his face. He stopped walking completely. Neither of them looked away. Outside, the wind pushed snow violently against the windows, while silence settled heavily between them. Evelyn realized something strange then. For 20 years, she had imagined herself angry, prepared, strong. But now, sitting only a few feet from him, She felt none of those things, only shock and exhaustion. Daniel took one slow step toward her table, then another, as though unsure whether he should approach at all. Finally, he stopped beside the empty chair across from her. Evelyn. Her name sounded unfamiliar in his voice now, softer, older, careful. Evelyn looked at the fire instead of him. Daniel. That was all she could manage. For a brief, awkward moment, neither spoke again. Then Daniel glanced toward the chair. "May I sit down?" Evelyn hesitated. Every instinct told her to stand up and leave, to protect the quiet life she had built without him. But another part of her, the part that had returned to this hotel every winter for 20 years, remained perfectly still. Finally, she nodded once. Daniel sat carefully across from her. The firelight moved softly across his face, and suddenly, memories Evelyn had spent years burying began rising quietly back to the surface. Train rides, winter mornings, laughter in tiny cafes, long conversations beside this exact fireplace, a life that once felt certain before one night destroyed everything. Daniel rested his hands together slowly. "I didn't know you still came here," he said after a while. Evelyn gave a faint, almost humorless smile. "I never stopped." Daniel lowered his eyes. And somehow, that small reaction told her more than words could have, because she realized then he understood exactly why she kept returning. That night, after returning to room 204, Evelyn could not sleep. The storm outside had grown stronger. Snow moved endlessly past the windows, while the ocean crashed against the dark shoreline below. She sat curled beneath a blanket in the chair beside the window, staring out into the night, and slowly, despite trying not to, she began remembering the first time she came here with Daniel. 20 years earlier, the hotel had looked exactly the same. The same wooden staircase, the same fireplace, the same soft piano music drifting through the restaurant in the evenings. Back then, Evelyn was 28, Daniel was 30, and they were deeply, foolishly certain life would unfold exactly the way they imagined. They had taken the overnight train north together just before Christmas. Daniel spent most of the ride talking excitedly about the future. Not in grand, dramatic ways, in small ways, the kind that feel more real. A small house outside the city, a golden retriever Daniel insisted they would someday own, Sunday mornings with music playing in the kitchen, shelves full of books, quiet, ordinary happiness. Evelyn remembered watching snow move past the train windows while listening to him speak. She had loved the way he described simple things as though they were enough to build an entire life around. And back then, they were. The first few days at the hotel had been perfect. peaceful walks beside the ocean, late dinners near the fireplace, laughing together beneath umbrellas while snow fell around them at night. Evelyn had truly believed she was living inside the beginning of the rest of her life. On the second evening, they sat together near the same window where she now sat alone every winter. Daniel had reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "We should come back here every year," he told her quietly. Evelyn smiled at the memory now, because in a strange way, they both had kept that promise, just not together. The storm outside rattled the glass harder. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Then another memory surfaced, one she had tried for years not to replay too clearly. The third night, the night everything changed. The hotel had lost electricity several times because of the storm. Guests stayed downstairs drinking wine near candlelight while heavy wind howled outside. Daniel had been quieter that evening, distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. At one point, Evelyn asked if something was wrong. He smiled and said no, but she remembered noticing tension behind his eyes. A tension she didn't understand then. Around midnight, Evelyn fell asleep beside him in room 204 while snow covered the town outside. But sometime later, she woke up alone. At first, she assumed he had gone downstairs or stepped outside briefly, but as minutes passed, uneasiness slowly turned into fear, and by sunrise, Daniel still had not returned. Evelyn opened her eyes slowly. Even now, 20 years later, the memories still hurt exactly the same. Not because he left, but because of the silence that came after. No explanation, no real goodbye, only confusion that lasted years longer than heartbreak itself. Downstairs somewhere, she heard distant footsteps moving through the quiet hotel halls. For one brief moment, she wondered if it was Daniel unable to sleep too. Then she turned back toward the ocean and whispered softly into the dark room, "Why did you come back now?" The next morning, the storm had finally begun to weaken. Snow covered the entire shoreline in soft, untouched white, and the ocean looked calmer beneath the pale gray sky. Evelyn barely slept. By the time she entered the hotel restaurant for breakfast, only a few guests were awake. Daniel was already there, sitting alone near the window with a cup of black coffee in front of him. For a moment, Evelyn considered turning around, but Daniel noticed her almost immediately and slowly stood up. "You can sit somewhere else if you want," he said quietly. "I'll understand." Evelyn looked at him for a long second. Then, without fully understanding why, she walked toward his table and sat down across from him. The silence between them felt different this morning, less shocking, more fragile, like two people carefully standing near something broken. A waitress brought Evelyn tea and quietly disappeared again. Daniel wrapped both hands around his coffee cup before finally speaking. "I didn't expect to ever see you again." Evelyn looked out toward the ocean. "Neither did I." Another silence followed. Then Daniel asked softly, "Do you still hate me?" The question surprised her, not because he asked it, because she genuinely did not know the answer. For years, she thought she hated him. Then eventually the anger faded into something quieter, something colder. Like an old wound that no longer bleeds, but never fully disappears. "I think I hated not understanding," she admitted finally. Daniel lowered his eyes slowly. "That's fair." Outside, snow drifted softly through the air. The hotel restaurant remained quiet except for distant music playing somewhere near the lobby. Evelyn studied Daniel carefully now. He looked tired, not simply older, tired in a deeper way, as though life had slowly worn parts of him down over the years. Finally, she asked the question she had carried inside herself for 2 decades. "What happened that night?" Daniel did not answer immediately. His fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup, and for the first time since seeing him again, Evelyn noticed fear in his expression. Real fear. "I've replayed that night in my head thousands of times," he said quietly. Evelyn remained silent. Daniel exhaled slowly before continuing. "Around 11 that night, I got a phone call. The sound of the ocean outside seemed suddenly louder. It was about my younger brother." Daniel paused briefly. He had gotten himself involved with dangerous people, gambling debts, loans, things I didn't fully know about until then. Evelyn listened carefully, barely moving. "He'd been badly beaten," Daniel continued. "They said if the money wasn't paid, things would get worse." The restaurant suddenly felt colder. Evelyn remembered now how distracted Daniel had seemed that evening. The constant checking of his phone, the tension in his face. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted quietly. "I only knew I had to leave immediately." Evelyn stared at him. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Daniel finally looked up at her, and the guilt in his eyes answered before his words did. "Because I was ashamed." Evelyn did not speak for several seconds. She simply watched Daniel across the table, while snow continued falling quietly beyond the restaurant windows. For 20 years, she had imagined countless explanations. Another woman, a secret family, a lie hidden behind the life she thought they shared. But shame, somehow she had never considered that. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair, exhaustion visible in every movement. At first, I thought I'd only be gone a few days, he admitted quietly. I kept telling myself I would explain everything once things settled down. Evelyn listened silently, but nothing settled down. He stared into his coffee as though the memories themselves were difficult to face. My brother owed far more money than I realized. I spent months trying to help him fix everything. And during all that time, Evelyn said softly, "You never called." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I know. Those two words carried more regret than any long explanation could have. Outside, the snowstorm had almost completely passed now. A pale winter light reflected softly across the ocean. Evelyn folded her hands together carefully. "You could have told me the truth," she said. "I would have stayed." Daniel gave a faint, sad smile. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." She frowned slightly. "I didn't want your life dragged into that mess," he continued. "The threats, the debts, the people involved." Evelyn looked away toward the shoreline. For years, she had believed Daniel left because he stopped loving her. And now she realized something almost harder to accept. He had loved her enough to leave badly. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. The old hotel owner quietly adjusted logs in the fireplace nearby while soft music played through the nearly empty dining room. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "There was another reason I never came back." Evelyn slowly looked at him again. Daniel hesitated, then admitted quietly, "After enough time passed, I didn't know how to return without destroying you all over again." The honesty in his voice hurt, because part of her understood exactly what he meant. There comes a point where silence becomes too large to cross, too much time, too many imagined explanations, too much damage already done. And eventually, people stop knowing whether they are protecting someone else or simply protecting themselves from facing what they ruined. Evelyn lowered her eyes slowly. "Do you know what the worst part was?" she asked softly. Daniel remained still. "I spent years thinking I wasn't enough for someone to stay. The moment the words left her mouth, Daniel's entire expression changed. Like hearing them physically hurt him. "Evelyn," but she gently shook her head. "I know now it wasn't that simple," she said quietly. "But back then, it changes you." The restaurant fell silent again, and for the first time since seeing each other, both of them fully understood something painful. They had not only lost each other that winter, they had lost the people they were before it happened. That evening, the storm clouds finally cleared. For the first time in days, the sky above the ocean opened into a cold stretch of winter stars. The town looked almost frozen in silence. Snow covered the empty streets, the rooftops, the quiet wooden benches near the shoreline. After dinner, Evelyn stepped outside alone, wrapping her coat tightly against the cold wind. The ocean air immediately stung her cheeks. For years, these walks had been part of her routine at the hotel. The sea, the snow, the sound of waves moving through darkness. It always helped her think, or sometimes helped her stop thinking entirely. She walked slowly along the shoreline path until she heard footsteps behind her. She already knew who it was before turning around. Daniel stopped a short distance away. "I wasn't trying to interrupt," he said quietly. "I just saw you leave." Evelyn looked toward the ocean again. Then, after a moment, she nodded slightly. "It's fine." For a while, they walked side by side in silence. The snow beneath their boots crunched softly with each step. The sea moved endlessly beside them, dark and calm beneath the moonlight. Strangely, the silence no longer felt painful, only unfamiliar, like two people trying to remember a language they once spoke fluently. Daniel glanced toward the water. "I forgot how beautiful this place is in winter." Evelyn gave a faint smile. "I didn't." He looked at her carefully then, and she kept coming anyway. There was no accusation in his voice, only quiet disbelief. Evelyn pulled her scarf slightly closer against the wind. "At first, I think I came because I wanted answers," she admitted softly. "Then eventually, it just became part of my life." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I used to wonder if you were happy." The question caught her off guard. She thought about it for a moment before answering honestly. Daniel nodded slowly, as though that was more than he expected. "And you?" she asked. He gave a tired breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Sometimes they continued walking. A small cafe near the harbor still glowed warmly despite the late hour. Inside, only two elderly men sat quietly drinking coffee. The rest of the town looked asleep. Evelyn suddenly realized how strange this moment was. For 20 years, Daniel existed only as memory, as unanswered questions, as a wound frozen somewhere far behind her life. And now here he was, beside her again, older, quieter, human, not the villain she imagined during lonely nights, not the perfect man she remembered either, just someone who had made choices and spent years living with them. Eventually, they stopped near the edge of the pier. The ocean stretched endlessly into darkness. Daniel rested his hands in his coat pockets before speaking softly. "I'd never had children." Evelyn looked at him. Neither did she. Something about that realization settled heavily between them. Not regret exactly, but awareness. Awareness of time, of entire lives unfolding differently because of one winter night. Daniel stared toward the horizon. Do you ever think about how small decisions change everything? He asked quietly. Evelyn followed his gaze toward the sea. All the time. The wind moved softly around them while snow drifted slowly through the moonlight. And for the first time in 20 years, they no longer felt like strangers standing inside old memories. They felt like two tired people finally beginning to understand the cost of silence. The next morning arrived quietly. Soft snow continued falling outside the hotel windows, though the storm itself had long passed. Evelyn woke earlier than usual. For several minutes, she remained lying in bed, listening to the distant sound of waves outside room 204. Something inside her felt unsettled, not because Daniel was here, but because after 20 years of silence, she could feel herself slowly beginning to understand him again, and that frightened her more than anger ever had. Downstairs, the hotel restaurant smelled of fresh coffee and fireplace smoke. Only a few tables were occupied. Daniel sat near the window reading something from a folded envelope beside his untouched breakfast. When Evelyn approached, he quickly slid the papers back inside. Too quickly, she noticed immediately. "Bad news?" she asked while sitting down. Daniel hesitated, then gave a faint, tired smile. "Something like that." Evelyn studied him carefully. For the first time since seeing him again, he looked genuinely unwell this morning. His face seemed paler, his movements slower, and there was a heaviness around him that hadn't been there before. "You should probably stop pretending everything's fine," she said quietly. Daniel let out a soft breath through his nose. "You always noticed more than I wanted you to." The old familiarity in that sentence almost startled them both. For a brief second, they looked at each other the way they once used to, comfortably, naturally. Then the moment passed. Daniel glanced toward the snowy ocean outside before speaking again. "When I said I was sick, I didn't tell you everything." Evelyn remained silent. The fireplace crackled softly nearby. Daniel folded his hands together slowly. "It's my heart," he admitted. They found the problem earlier this year. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten slightly. "There's surgery," he continued, "but the risks aren't small." For several seconds, she didn't know what to say after everything that had happened between them. The idea of losing him again somehow still hurt. Daniel looked down at the table. "I almost didn't come here this winter," he said quietly. "But I kept thinking, if I don't go now, I may never have another chance." Evelyn watched him carefully, and suddenly she understood something she hadn't before. Daniel had not returned looking for romance or forgiveness. He came because people nearing the possibility of losing their future often returned to the places where their lives changed forever, to understand them, to make peace with them, maybe even to say goodbye. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her teacup for warmth. "You should have told me sooner," she said softly. Daniel gave a small, sad smile. "I wasn't sure I had the right to bring any more pain into your life." The honesty in his voice exhausted her more than anger ever could, because she realized something painful then. Daniel had spent 20 years punishing himself in silence almost as much as she had. Outside, snow continued drifting quietly across the shoreline. And for the first time since his return, Evelyn began wondering not what they lost in the past, but how much time remained in front of them now. That evening, the town seemed quieter than ever. Snow covered the narrow streets in smooth, untouched layers, and most of the small shops near the harbor had already closed for the night. Only a few warm lights still glowed through frosted windows. Daniel suggested they walk down to an old bar near the marina. Evelyn almost refused at first. 20 years ago, they used to visit that same place every evening during their first winter here. Back then, it had been full of music, laughter, tourists escaping the cold. Now it was nearly empty. Just a bartender polishing glasses behind the counter and soft jazz playing low through old speakers. Tom had aged the place gently, like everything else in the town. Daniel ordered whiskey. Evelyn chose tea. Some habits never changed. For a while, they simply sat together listening to the wind outside. The silence between them no longer felt awkward now, only careful. Like both understood how fragile this strange reunion truly was. Finally, Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair and asked, "Did you ever come close to leaving the city?" Evelyn looked down at the steam rising from her cup. "A few times," she admitted, "but somehow I always stayed." Daniel nodded slowly. "I left too much." The words hung quietly between them. After a moment, Evelyn asked softly, "Did you ever love someone else?" Daniel looked genuinely surprised by the question. Then he smiled faintly. "No." Evelyn studied him carefully, unsure whether she believed him at first. But then she realized something. Daniel wasn't trying to impress her anymore. They were far beyond that stage of life. Too old for games, too tired for pretending. "What about you?" he asked gently. Evelyn stared toward the snowy harbor outside the window. "There were people," she admitted, "but it never lasted very long." Daniel lowered his eyes slowly. Neither of them needed to explain why. Some heartbreaks quietly shape the rest of a person's life without them even realizing it. The bartender placed another drink in front of Daniel before moving away again. Outside, wind pushed snow softly across the empty pier. Evelyn suddenly noticed Daniel rubbing his chest briefly, almost unconsciously. A small movement, but enough. "You're in pain," she said quietly. Daniel immediately shook his head. "I'm fine." "You're lying." For a second, he looked almost embarrassed at being noticed, then finally sighed. "Sometimes it gets worse at night." Evelyn felt fear move through her unexpectedly fast. It startled her because, despite everything, some part of her still cared instinctively. Daniel looked at her expression and gave a tired smile. "Don't look at me like that," he said softly. "Like what?" "Like you're afraid." Evelyn looked away toward the dark harbor, but she didn't answer because she was not of the past anymore, not even of him, but of how quickly life could suddenly end before people truly said what mattered. The jazz music continued quietly around them while snow fell endlessly outside. And for the first time since Daniel returned, both of them began understanding that this reunion might be far more temporary than either wanted to admit. By the time they returned to the hotel, it was nearly midnight. The town outside had completely disappeared beneath snowfall and darkness. Only the ocean remained visible beyond the windows, endless black water moving quietly beneath the winter sky. Inside, the hotel was almost silent. Most guests were asleep. Soft golden light from the fireplace flickered across the empty lounge. Daniel removed his coat slowly, clearly more tired now than earlier that evening. Evelyn noticed it immediately. "You should rest," she said quietly. Daniel gave a faint smile. "I spent 20 years avoiding conversations with you." He looked toward the fire. "I think I can stay awake one more night." Something about the honesty in his voice made her sit down beside the fireplace instead of going upstairs. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt lived in, like old grief slowly losing its sharp edges. Daniel stared into the flames before finally speaking again. "You know what I regretted most?" Evelyn looked at him quietly. "Not leaving," he said softly. "Leaving without giving you the choice to understand." The fire crackled gently between them. Evelyn folded her hands together in her lap. "For years," she admitted, "I thought there was something wrong with me." Daniel immediately shook his head. "No." "But that's what abandonment does," she continued quietly. "It makes people question their own worth." Daniel lowered his eyes slowly. Every word seemed to wound him deeper than anger ever could. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and this time it did not sound like guilt. It sounded like grief. Evelyn watched the fire for a moment before speaking again. I used to replay our last winter together constantly, she said softly. I kept trying to find the exact moment everything changed. Daniel remained silent, but now I think, she paused, searching for the right words. Maybe people don't notice when their lives are changing. Outside, snow moved gently against the windows. The hotel felt suspended outside of time. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair, exhaustion visible in his face now. I was happy here, he admitted quietly, with you. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. So was I. For several seconds, neither spoke again. Then Daniel turned toward her carefully. I never stopped loving you. The words settled softly into the room. No drama, no shock. Just truth arriving many years too late. Evelyn looked at him for a very long moment, and finally answered with equal honesty. I know. And somehow, that was enough. No promises followed, no impossible attempts to reclaim the past. Only two people finally saying aloud what silence had hidden for 20 years. The fire burned lower as the night grew deeper around them, and for the first time since that long ago winter, Evelyn no longer felt alone inside the memory of it. Morning came slowly, not with brightness, but with the soft gray light that spread across the ocean like diluted ink. Evelyn woke earlier than usual again. For a moment, she stayed still in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the hotel waking up. Footsteps in distant hallways, a door closing somewhere below, the faint hum of the old heating system, and beneath all of it, the ocean, steady and endless. When she finally went downstairs, Daniel was not in the restaurant, only his untouched breakfast set near the window. A cup of coffee, half cold, a folded napkin beside it. Evelyn frowned slightly and looked around. Something felt off. The receptionist noticed her expression immediately. He went out early this morning, the man said gently. Justa said he needed some air. Evelyn nodded, but a strange uneasiness settled inside her. She stepped outside into the cold. The air was sharper than yesterday, the sky still heavy with winter clouds, and there, along the shoreline path, she saw him. Daniel stood near the water, coat unbuttoned slightly despite the cold wind. He was not looking at the ocean. He was just standing still, like someone trying to remember how to be in a place for the last time. Evelyn walked toward him slowly. He did not turn immediately. Only when she was close enough did he finally speak. I didn't think I would make it to this morning, he said quietly. Evelyn stopped beside him. Don't say that. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. I'm not being dramatic. He finally looked at her, and in his eyes, there was something different now. Not fear, not regret. Something quieter, acceptance. "I think this is what I came here for," he said. Evelyn shook her head slightly. "To come here and leave again?" Daniel looked toward the ocean. "No," he said softly. "To come here and finally stop running from it." The wind moved between them, cold and steady. Evelyn felt something tightening in her chest. "You don't get to leave like that," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her again, and for the first time, there was no distance between who he was and what he felt. "I didn't come back to take anything from you," he said. "I came back to make sure I didn't disappear from your life the same way I did before." Evelyn stared at him. The ocean behind him moved endlessly, indifferent to everything they were saying. "And now?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly. "Now I think I'm finally ready to stop holding on." Silence followed, a long one, not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything they had never said before. Evelyn looked down at the snow beneath her feet, then slowly back at him. "You should have stayed," she said quietly. Daniel nodded once. "I know." The wind softened slightly. The sea continued its quiet rhythm. And for a moment, neither of them moved, because they both understood something they had avoided for years. Some endings do not arrive loudly. They arrive gently, like winter light fading over an empty shore. That evening, the hotel felt different. Not empty, but quiet in a way that made everything feel temporary. Like the building itself understood that something was ending. Evelyn sat alone in room 204 for a long time. She didn't unpack. She didn't move much. She just looked out at the ocean as the last light of day slowly disappeared behind the horizon. Snow had started again, soft, almost gentle. When there was a knock at her door, she already knew who it was. Daniel stood outside holding his coat, but he didn't put it on. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Evelyn stepped aside. He entered slowly, as if the room carried too many memories to disturb. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Daniel looked around. "This room never changed," he said softly. Evelyn gave a faint smile. "Neither did I," she replied. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something inside her had already shifted. Daniel walked to the window and looked out at the dark ocean. "I think I'm going back tomorrow," he said. Evelyn nodded slowly. She had expected this, and still, hearing it made something inside her tighten. "Back to where?" she asked. Daniel paused. "To whatever comes next." Silence followed, not painful, just final. Evelyn stepped closer to the window beside him. Outside, snow fell over the shoreline they had both returned to so many times in different ways. "I used to think I was waiting for something here," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her. "And now?" Evelyn hesitated, then answered honestly. "Now I think I was just waiting for myself to stop being stuck in the past." Daniel nodded, as if he understood that completely. He turned toward her slowly. "I'm glad you kept coming here," he said. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not sure I am," she replied softly, and there was no bitterness in it, only truth, because 20 winters of returning had carried both comfort and pain. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "You didn't waste them," he said. "You survived them." That sentence stayed between them longer than anything else that night. Finally, Daniel reached into his pocket and placed something on the table near the window. A small hotel key. Room 204. The spare one he must have kept from earlier. "I don't think I'll need this anymore," he said quietly. Evelyn looked at it, then at him. Neither moved for a few seconds. Outside, the wind moved gently across the sea, not stormy, not violent, just passing, like everything eventually does. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said softly. He hesitated, then nodded once. "Goodbye, Evelyn." No tears, no collapse, no dramatic final moment. Just two people standing in a room that had held both beginnings and endings. Daniel left first. The door closing behind him sounded quieter than Evelyn expected. She stood by the window long after he was gone, watching the ocean, watching the snow. And for the first time in 20 years, she did not replay the past. She let it stay where it belonged, in the past. The next morning, room 204 was empty. Evelyn checked out without looking back. Outside, the sea was still there, still moving, still endless. But something inside her finally wasn't. And as she walked toward the train station, she realized the most important thing she had learned that winter. Some people don't come back to change the past. They come back so you can finally leave it behind. Sometimes we wait for closure from other people, only to realize that closure was something we had to create ourselves. Evelyn did not get all the answers she once imagined she needed, and Daniel did not return to fix what was already gone. But something quieter happened instead. They finally stopped living inside the moment that broke them. 20 winters of coming back to the same hotel were not just about the past. They were about holding on until holding on no longer defined her life. And when she finally left room 204 for the last time, she didn't feel like she had lost something. She felt like she had put something down, not forgiven, not forgotten, but finally released. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe for more emotional bedtime stories. Some endings don't close a story. They simply return you back to your own life.